coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Barely submerged in the Democrat Party, all of the eminences are basically either hostile to Kamala or just happy for her to see her fail.
Well, I think Obama probably wants her in because, I mean, he kind of negotiated her ascension. And I suspect that's how he'll have his fourth term. Because if she's in there, like, who's she going to appoint? She'll just put in, like, whoever Obama tells her to. So, but yeah, I think the Bidens and the Clintons are probably either hostile or ambivalent. I mean, although we saw Jimmy Carter today cast his vote for her, even though he really looks like he's, like, dead.
He's the Democrats' ideal voter. He's already halfway in the grave. I'm sorry.
Good point.
I know it's cruel. I mean, so there's this ad that came out aimed at men, which I'm so anxious about referring to this because I keep thinking surely somebody is going to pull the rug out and this is going to turn out to have been a hoax or a scam or a spoof. But this ad about I'm man enough to support women and to vote for Kamala, it sort of embodies what we're talking about, this like politics by scolding that you're referring to, Mike. And it's funny because it always comes in terms of like wish casting. It's like real men do this. Hello, and welcome once again to The Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at The American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and energy drinks editor of The American Mind. I found a new brand, an altogether new brand of energy drinks for this podcast. It was 2 for 1 at my local gas station. It's called Fusion. And its main distinguishing characteristic seems to be that the flavors aren't even related to foods of any kind. They're just abstractions. So Paradise Pulse is the one I'm drinking, and it tastes like Skittles and niacin. I am joined this week by managing editor Mike Sabo and Barron, who has returned in a semi-regular rotation to join us. Especially glad to have him around as the absurdity of the election season ratchets up. I feel that we have reached peak silly, although I feel also that we probably should never declare that because it can always get sillier. It can always get worse. It can always get sillier. Right now, there seems to be a slightly carnival mood in the air, a bit perhaps of tentative hopefulness. You never want to get too thrilled about anything in a race this tight, but there was definitely a shift in, as they say, momentum around about the end of last week. We talked about this a little bit before on the podcast, but the trend has continued, as we were saying, that, you know, whatever else is going on, the campaigns are acting as if they have polling to the effect that Trump is in the lead. They've sent Harris out on a lot of media hits, which it's not what I would do if I were trying to increase my chances as a Kamala Harris strategist, but it's hard to see what else they have to do. Now, in addition to further media appearances, which we will be talking about, it seems as if the campaign has adopted a real sort of laser-targeted demographic strategy. So today we're just going to talk about a few different groups that the Democrats seem really eager to appeal to, starting with Black men. This is a problem for the Harris campaign. That's traditionally been very strong African-American support for the Democrats, certainly peaked under Obama during the Obama elections, but Biden too, relied on getting a pretty significant percentage of the Black vote. Starting to look like maybe Harris is not. Black men are going to defect to Trump or just stay home altogether. In response, the Harris campaign has released this document. I guess it's a white paper, a policy paper. Vice President Harris will deliver for Black men. And she outlines, or her campaign outlines, 5 things that a Harris administration would do specifically to serve Black men, starting with providing 1 million loans that are fully forgivable to Black entrepreneurs and others to start a business. Every word in that sentence is doing so much work that I almost feel we could conduct a close reading of each one. But I want to highlight the concept of the fully forgivable loan. Has anybody really come across this before? Do you guys, is this a thing, or did Harris just invent the idea of like a fully, I mean, it's a wonderful exercise in newspeak. I mean, great thing to come up with to describe basically just giving people money. Didn't they try this already? And everybody was like, no, this is literally against every law and also unconstitutional. What do you guys, what do you guys think? Does that matter?
Doesn't sound like it matters much. They're sort of at the point where they're like just chucking the football 50 yards down the field. It feels like maybe someone will catch it on our team. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, I mean, it would just be blatantly unconstitutional. You can't just say we're going to give money to Black men, but oddly enough, nobody seems to be questioning that.
And others, meaning like presumably, and others means like and everybody.
I guess, or you know, they'll figure out some qualifications around it that make it apply mostly to Black men, I guess. Well, you know, I guess Trump does this too a little bit, saying that he's going to, what does he say? He said he would let people deduct car interest loans.
Right. Well, this is now his version of this is economic. Yeah, he's always picking out this very specific. It's like, I'm gonna forgive, loans on like strippers in Vegas. I mean, I'm making this up, but it's always like some very particular demographic.
Well, like no more tax on tips, things like that.
That was the big one.
Yeah, I mean, the momentum question is really interesting. I like to follow the poly market and the betting markets, which really are swinging pretty starkly. Like Trump is now at 59. But there was a funny article in the Times yesterday where they were saying like, well, the betting market, some people think they're really good, but however, poly market shows Trump up by 4, but the polls show Kamala Harris up by 2. And it's like, yeah, but betting odds are not the same as polls. It's like if I said, well, the Bengals are favored by, like, the betting line says that the Bengals should win by 13, but then they only won by 2 or whatever. It's like, it doesn't really, it's two different things. Or the horse that won was running 5-1, yet it only won by a fraction of a second. We're talking about, it's like apples and oranges. So I just thought it was funny that the New York Times didn't really seem to have a handle on what that means. But it's interesting. I don't know. The momentum does seem like it's shifted.
Nobody seems to understand polls. This is a funny I mean, Nate Silver is constantly getting grumpy about this. Every time I hear him talking, it's just all about how people misinterpret the numbers he puts out. On top of which, it does seem like there are these real problems with our polling methods in America. I'm sure that's true in other countries too, but the last few elections, there have just been all of these factors that interfere. The fact that people lie to pollsters about who they previously voted for, if their candidate lost, the fact that people don't want to come out, the bias in this choice of samples and so on and so forth. And yeah, it definitely feels as if the betting markets are, in this case, onto something that hasn't, for various reasons, shown up in the polls. It was when they brought out Obama. So the other Black men thing is that they're having Obama gather the Black men into huddle ups so that he can berate them for not wanting to be led by a woman. I mean, it really is just a embodiment of the worst. It's like if you came up with some snide and an unfair right wing caricature of the Democrat Party, it couldn't be worse than this. Like that, they would accuse you if you just reported this to somebody from 10 years ago. They would accuse you of being like utterly tendentious. It's too much to be believed.
It's really kind of like, the WNBA argument. Why don't men watch the WNBA? And then they just browbeat you and rake you over the coals because you're such a misogynist, etc. I mean, when does that ever work? I don't get it. And to see the Democrats just completely just trotting this out Obama was 2008, 2012. I mean, come on, over and over and over again. It's just the same thing. And the polls suggest, I mean, New York Times, Siena, they just did a poll that found only 70% of black men say that they support Kamala Harris. So, I mean, that is a big problem. And all the browbeating, all the kind of handouts and give outs, I don't think that's going to change it. And like you said, the momentum clearly is shifting. Harris is still, I think, up against Trump in the Real Clear Politics average, 1.7%. Top battleground states, though, Trump is actually beating her, 0.7. And that is, and I keep saying this over and over again, that is so much closer than where Biden was in 2020, and then especially where Hillary Clinton was in 2016. So the Democrats, I mean, they're seeing more and more issues, and I just don't think they have really any solutions to that other than just going back to the well and just doing the same thing over and over again.
It's interesting because Obama upbraiding black men, this was like something he did when he was running for president the first time, when he said that don't have a big party to celebrate 8th grade graduation. That's nothing special. And don't feed your children cold Popeyes for breakfast. And don't sit around watching Sports Center all the time. But this was all seen as like him trying to triangulate for white people, right? Like that wasn't being really directed at black people. And anyway, that type of talk like gets people annoyed. Like when Bill Cosby used to do it, like people say that that's kind of like opened the door to all of his problems. But yeah, it seemed like a weird thing for them to bring out Obama to do. And then they brought out Bill Clinton the other day, and he started talking about, I'm sorry, what's her name? The woman who was murdered by the illegal immigrant, Laken Riley. And Bill Clinton is like, well, if we'd had vetting, she'd be alive today. It's like, right. Yeah, that's what Trump has been saying. So I don't know what they're doing. I have no idea what they're doing unless they're trying to like, I mean, one could imagine that the Clintons are, I imagine Obama is in favor of Kamala Harris, but I can imagine, I mean, clearly the Bidens have no interest in her becoming president. And it wouldn't surprise me if like the Clintons, Hillary Clinton was supposed to be the first woman president. So why does she want, how excited is she really going to be to have this like stand-in? She's not going to like necessarily get all behind having Kamala Harris be the first woman president.
Wait, that's an interesting theory. So you think like this is certainly true in the case of Biden, but you think that like submerged in the Democrat Party, barely submerged in the Democrat Party, all of the eminences are basically either hostile to Kamala or just happy for her to see her fail?
Well, I think Obama probably wants her in because, I mean, he kind of negotiated her ascension. And I suspect that's how he'll have his fourth term. Because if she's in there, like, who's she going to appoint? She'll just put in, like, whoever Obama tells her to. So, but yeah, I think the Bidens and the Clintons are probably either hostile or ambivalent. I mean, although we saw Jimmy Carter today cast his vote for her, even though he really looks like he's like dead.
He's the Democrats' ideal voter. He's already halfway in the grave. I'm sorry.
Good point.
I know it's cruel. I mean, so there's this ad that came out aimed at men, which I'm so anxious about referring to this because I keep thinking surely somebody is going to pull the rug out and this is going to turn out to have been a hoax or a scam or a spoof. But this ad about I'm man enough to support women and to vote for Kamala, it sort of embodies what we're talking about, this like politics by scolding that you're referring to, Mike. And it's funny because it always comes in terms of like wish casting. It's like real men do this.
Right.
What they mean is like, we want men to do this. And they see that it is possible to shame men by accusing them of falling short of masculinity. But the problem is they've spent 20 years or more deriding masculinity and the very notion that there is such a thing as manhood or some set of ideals that is aspirational that men should want to live up to. And now they have this totally cockamamie idea that they're just going to replace that with like Tim Walz in in a duck blind wearing orange.
Yeah, just like being weird, throwing up his hands. I mean, like looking like Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones. Like, it's just, yeah, you're right. Like at the same time, masculinity is, a horrible thing, toxic masculinity, and then in this other thing, what they're going to do is just replace it with, I mean, basically a B caricature version, almost of femininity. I mean, it's just so silly in this ad. Again, it just reminds me of 2016, like everything that, Trump's enemy said about him, it's like just totally backfired. And this is the same thing. Like everything they're trying to do is just totally backfiring. I mean, every man I either talked to, saw on X, even on Facebook, this was just a whole laughing stock. I mean, they just couldn't believe that this is what the Democrats' vision of a man is, which is like totally emasculated, just ball and chain to the woman. It's just, it's amazing. I mean, it's just, again, totally counterproductive.
What I thought was really funny about that ad was, okay, supposedly, all right, not even supposedly, the Democrats own the youth vote, right? They own youth and they control media culture. And they're supposedly like, I mean, they have the brains of Hollywood and television, people who are masters of like visual snark and irony and positioning and messaging. Yet the only way they could like try to communicate this outreach to working class men was to have these guys who were actors, like obviously not working class men, and have them making these kind of online sort of snarky jokes that only if you are completely enmeshed in like the mind of a Gen Z media operative would you even have any idea what they were talking about. Like they have one of the guys say, I'm man enough to raw dog a long airplane flight. Now, this is like some kind of meme or trend on like TikTok, and it's like this joke among like finance bro types. But what I mean to say is that these media people are so locked in their own bubble of their own preconceptions and their own rules about how to define masculinity that they can only project their own sort of self-conscious deprecation of it onto the men that they're supposedly trying to attract. Here's something that I think is very interesting. It's because I think the real working class men that they would try to attract, none of them are going to be like, I'm really interested in masculinity and in manhood, and that's why I'm voting for Trump. They would be like, okay, well, the border's open, the economy's not good, inflation is high, crime is this, schools, whatever, actual issues. But the Democrats can only see everything in terms of identity. So they're like, well, the men probably also see everything in terms of identity. So we have to sort of try to attract them by poking fun at their identity, yet allowing that they still do have an identity, but we just have to reframe what masculinity is. And then they'll be like, oh, right, yeah, okay. But that's not really the point. No man is going to be like looking at these guys who are obvious actors, making like sort of snarky jokes about, I'm a man and I can drink bourbon, neat. But it's like, well, it's like men in drag as men.
Yes, male to male transsexualism. Totally. This is okay. So this is so smart, Seth, and there's like a lot here because it really, I think, demonstrates that the entire tedious conversation about masculinity that we've been having basically for as long as I've been sentient has now devolved into like an utterly abstracted parlor game where it's like one side thinks that masculinity is about sort of reframing your ego and becoming an evolved male and supporting women, and the other side thinks it's about like sunning your balls and staring at the and there's always been this problem with the whole idea of like a capital D discourse around manhood, that talking about masculinity is not a very manly thing to do. Like it's very feminine. It's very introspective sort of theoretical practice, and whereas like doing, like caring about enterprises and doing things is kind of like the manly thing. So as you say, no man who has sort of respect for his own masculinity is going to find it appealing to be told like what men do. Like, yeah, it makes me wonder if the whole thing is actually aimed at women, actually, in some way, like that there's some like girl boss element.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say that. Like, okay, I mean, what deep sea fishing crew, what loggers are going to be sitting around, talking about, I am so manly? Like, they're going to be doing the things, right? And that in itself carries the aspects and the characteristics of masculinity. They're not going to be talking about it, they're going to be doing it. I mean, guys do, they don't generally talk. So, I mean, women are the ones who always want to say, hey, share your emotions, do this, do that. And that's great. But that's just not how a lot of guys are wired. And that's fine. But yeah, I mean, like you said, this is really, I think, in a way, a cipher, or just, yeah, a way for women to kind of almost express to themselves what they want masculinity to be. And it's just, it's not that. It's like, it's really kind of above politics. It's kind of like a rewiring, or kind of conceiving, male and female, even DNA in a sense. It's just, and it's like, well, why is this showing up in politics? This is so silly. And it just shows again how like abstracted the Democrats are as a party. I mean, this is what they want to do. I mean, it's really like rebellion against nature itself in so many different ways.
Well, it really is like this kind of, I think you're right, Mike. It's this kind of wish projection on the part of like the women and, no offense, like homosexuals in the Democratic National Committee media, sort of projecting out, this is what men should want. This is how men should. If only men were the way we want them to be, this is how they would be talking. Like realizing like, no, we don't hate women. We like women. So stop hating women. That's not masculine. All of their preconceptions and all of their desires, they can't get out of their own way, essentially, on it, which is so interesting because they, like I said, they own media, they own marketing, they own Hollywood. They know how to project messaging. They sell millions of trucks to men.
Right.
Why can't they like figure out their programming so it's like far less awkward? If they're advertising about football, trucks, whatever else they advertise, they sell to men, was this bad? They wouldn't sell anything.
Yeah, well, when they sell trucks, they have a product that men actually want, right?
Well, there's that.
It's a good point, right? Like the old guard of Hollywood has been cringe about this for a long time, and they're part of it is generational. Part of it is that the people who used to be hip and command all this star power are now like doddering, sort of plastic surgery laden weirdos, old people. So there's that element of it, and the attempt to kind of port to TikTok and YouTube and to like use their connection to star power there has had limited success. Like I remember Obama talking to Glozell, the YouTube star who like bathes in Fruit Loops or something, and that's always been itself kind of cringe. But I think it has to do with like when you start to talk about when you make a full on assault and you say, we don't want to just sell you a thing that you're already kind of interested in, and we want to present it to you in a way that we know that has like yours. Like, rather, we want to sell you something that is like actually antithetical to what you are up to. It just suddenly that's like falls terribly flat.
I guess it's kind of like when they had Dylan Mulvaney, what's his name? The trans, the beautiful trans model advertising Bud Light. It was like it seems like a failure on that scale in terms of figuring out what your audience wants to see. And I guess advertisers are supposed to flatter their audience, but in these cases they seem to just be flattering themselves.
I mean, it's like a bunch of brain rotted Yas brats like working on, they're like working on their academic theory about masculinity. We're already kind of on the other subject. We've moved on from the race thing to the sex thing, but I just want to toss in one other news story here, which is the possibility that everybody's talking about that Kamala might go on Rogan to deal with her man problem. And it's a risky, risky move, whatever that line is from Dodgeball. Let's see if it plays off. Let's see if it works out for him.
Bold move,
Cotton. Thank you. Yeah, bold
Jason
move.
Bateman.
Yeah, right. Side note, by the way, that my suggestion for all these tech bros that are raw dogging flights. So you feel like your brain is scattered and you can't focus on anything, and you're being too distracted by these sort of ADHD modern technologies, and you just want to focus on one thing that can you want to clear your mind and meditate. Would you mind if I recommend reading a book? Instead of why isn't this all just to avoid opening a physical book and avoid confronting the fact that you can't keep your anyway? That's a separate issue. But the Rogan thing, which is sort of the replacement for book reading among some people, these long podcasts, which I have nothing against. I return to what I was talking about at the end of last week, which is the Democrat Party and some conservative critics seem to be operating on the theory that Kamala's problem is that she's inarticulate or that she gets nervous. And I think this is being too kind to Kamala. This is too optimistic on the part of Kamala's team. They seem to think that if she could just get past her personality block, there would be thoughts in her head that she could then communicate, that she's now just failing to communicate those thoughts. My problem is I think she's expressing perfectly the contents of her brain. I just think that what's going on up there is either repellent to most normal people, or totally incoherent. So why would Rogan help with that? Is this just all they have? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think, and I even mentioned, Rogan last week, even with Trump, why isn't Trump on? And all of a sudden now there's rumblings that it sounds like that's going to happen. I think it's the medium. I mean, it's a powerful one today. Rogan's show, especially on Spotify, I mean, I assume is still the number one podcast out there. He just has a lot of name recognition, a lot of people listening. So I think Kamala thinks, and this even might be her younger kind of campaign advisors too, might be even just pushing her in this direction that, hey, you have to do this. Trump has done all these podcasts. He's out there. You kind of have to match him, which even if that's true in a sense, that just shows, I mean, she is just losing ground rapidly. Just if she thinks she has to follow what Trump's doing, that is not a good sign for her campaign already. But I think it's just the media environment we're in. And I think it's something she just thinks she has to do. I mean, I'm waiting for, if she actually goes on to Rogan, Rogan to turn to Jamie and say, hey, roll that footage on what you said about, illegal immigrants and what we have to give them. Roll this footage, roll that footage. So that'll be, she's on there for 3 hours. That's going to expose her, I think, in a big way, and just the nonsense to kind of flow out.
Yeah, because even if Rogan, I mean, I think Rogan would be fair. I can't imagine that he would be like attacking her necessarily.
Right.
But he does just ask basic questions like, well, what do you mean by that? He's very good at that, because he's not he knows his own intellectual limits in a way. So he never tries to outsmart his subjects, but he'll just ask them to explain what they're talking about in fairly plain language, which we've seen. It's a total disaster. And the thing is, she comes out of a hard left milieu in San Francisco and California Democrat politics, where nothing she's ever said has been challenged. And so I think if we were in a different political climate and she could just go on about equity and Black lives and all that kind of stuff, and I'm speaking and all of the the usual things, I think she'd be fine. But she's constantly, you can see her she's working to keep the talking points ahead of her own thoughts. Personally, I can't imagine it would go well for her. I mean, even in the friendliest of environments, they've had to, when she went on 60 Minutes, and they had to clip in the answers they thought were better.
Yeah.
I mean, Rogan, he would be fair, but that's the problem for her. She can't really deal with a fair interview.
Yeah, you're not going to cut out from your 3-hour conversation like the 15 minutes. No, I mean, this is like putting me in mind of Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was not one of our projected topics for today, but just as a comparison case, right? So he wrote this book in which, having moved on from the case for reparations in America, he proceeds like some sort of like the person you're always talking about, Seth, who just found out about Israel and is now an expert. He's like, he goes to Israel for 10 days and in the crudest possible way exports American race obsession and the template that it spawned in the academy to the Israel-Palestine conflict. He goes on CBS, one of their morning shows, and they basically just ask him in the gentlest sense. They're like, so you don't think Israel has a right to exist on the basis of your 10-day sojourn there, you know? And they proceed to have this kind of, to me, rather anodyne and sort of low IQ conversation about Israel. But the only point is, CBS had like a tribunal. I mean, it's not exaggerating to say that there was a company-wide racial reckoning over this mildly controversial interview, which is sort of the environment that Kamala seems to expect, or that she seems fitted to. Like, that's the environment that that her survival mechanisms have evolved to cope with. And now she's been dropped into this other space where she has no idea what to do. No, I think like I hesitate to say it because it seems almost too good to be true, but I don't think they have any way to deal with this. Like, there is no.
This is ultimately, this whole thing is a defense of the American primary system, because I've always thought the thing about the Democratic and the Republican, the political primary system, is that it forces these politicians who are massive egoists or whatever they are, but nevertheless, they have to go to these towns in New Hampshire and Iowa. They have to go to every damn, cookout and state fair and glad hand with people who've already met 50 or 60 other major politicians over the last 20 or 30 years or whatever. And they actually have to go out and press the flesh. And it is a brutal exercise. But the thing is, it does winnow out the people who can't do it, and the people who can't, manage this kind of little dance of talking to people. And she's completely bypassed that entire system. She didn't do it in 2020, and then she was installed in 2024. So she's never had to encounter. And this is talking to people in your own party in the Democratic primary system. She hasn't even had to do that. So, and then who knows how the California, you're just installed. I mean, she sounds like she's just been installed all the time. She's not good at talking to people, clearly. Look, I'm sure she's actually probably a lot of fun. I mean, she seems like she enjoys herself.
That's how they're trying to position her, as like this sort of loopy wine aunt, right? Like,
right.
It's probably fun to hang out with her.
But she can't answer questions, and she doesn't know how to deal with things. On the other hand, you've got like JD Vance seems like he's probably the best at this I've ever seen. Him and Buttigieg. But the two of them are just like really polished and really know how to turn a conversation around and dominate the interview or whatever. She's just really bad at it, and I can't imagine that going on Joe Rogan or I mean, she went on Stephen Colbert and it was a nightmare. She can't talk. She went on Howard Stern and she went on The View and said like, oh no, I don't think I'm different from Joe. There's no way in which I'm different from Joe Biden. She can't handle the easiest interviews.
It's true. How do you flop Colbert?
Right. I mean, Colbert's audience, clapping seals who are absolutely 100% behind her, with a host, Colbert, who is absolutely 100% behind her. Like, how do you flop that? How do you mess up like she did? It's crazy. And Seth, like you said, I mean, going back to the primary system, I mean, she in past primaries, not liked by members of her own party. And all of a sudden she's installed to this position to where now all of a sudden we all have to forget history and say, oh yeah, this is great. Her party didn't even want her. So I mean, it's amazing, yeah, just that she's been elevated to this position, and that, again, I mean, polls are close. Trump has momentum, but there's certainly a possibility she can win the presidency, and it's kind of a narrative on and just shows where U.S. politics is currently, and it's not in a good place.
We should say we're recording this like an hour before she goes on Brett Baier. I think she's doing it at 6 ET, so that'll have aired by the time people hear this. I mean, either that will sort of be an interesting test case. It will either confirm everything we're saying, or we'll be surprised. Oh, actually, she's sort of pulled it together like she did for the debate. But I really doubt it. I don't know. I have another minor question, which is: have we all gotten over calling him Ta-Nehisi Coates? For a while, it seemed like people had decided Nahasi was the way to say it, and now even his supporters are back to Nahisi. Maybe it's just whatever one you're not saying is correct.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw like I saw some interview, or like not an interview, like he was on a stage and people were asking questions, and yeah, this woman was very delicately and apologetically asking which the right way to say it is. And I can't remember what his response was, but basically, essentially the message was, well, whichever way you're doing it is wrong. He was this white woman, like this very earnest liberal. So he basically made it clear that,
yeah,
Ta-Nehisi Coates reminds me of that old, like there's an old saying, like, may a cat look at a king?
Yes, right.
And like, he always has this attitude, like, how dare you?
Mm-hmm.
But whatever. Just his kind of like regal posturing.
Yeah, it's like there's a commercial on now at football games where Peyton Manning is painting. He's learning to paint, and he says, I can't remember what it's a commercial for, but he says, like, we all have different dimensions and layers to our characters. Like, I'm not just Peyton Manning, all-star footballer. I'm also Peyton Manning. Like, I'm painting, and and the teacher comes up and says, "That's real good, Peyton." And he's like, "It's good, Peyton, or it's good, Peyton." She's like, go back and forth. It's Ta-Nehisi Coates. Nehisi. Like, you get that right? All right. Well, I'm glad we cleared that up. We have one more Kamala absurdity to address, and this is a Chris Rufo original, a sort of classic Chris Rufo dug up what seemed to be, and I'm as always, these things are developing in real time, but Chris is very good at this, and as far as I can tell, in Kamala Harris's book Smart on Crime, which is from 2009, it would seem that much like Harvard ex-president Claudine Gay and several other sort of darlings of the intellectual left, Kamala, or Kamala's ghostwriter, has really plagiarized a lot of sections of this book. There are sections from a Bureau of Justice Assistance report from 2000, an Urban Institute report from 2004, a John Jay College of Criminal Justice press release describing a 2007 award, an Associated Press article in 2008, and a Wikipedia article in 2008 from 2008. Just airdropped in like large chunks. You can go to Chris's Twitter page and sort of survey these. I mean, now I am on the record sort of as a Wikipedia enjoyer. I really think Wikipedia is a better resource than we give it credit for if you check the footnotes. But you can't just pick up paragraphs from it and put them into your book without attribution. I wish I had known this before I came out with my book. That it was possible to just like lift these sections. It would have been so much easier, if I could have just like copy pasted my favorite passage. But I mean, I don't know. Like, we should say allegedly, but it seems to me like this almost certainly is real. Democrats are doing a kind of conservatives pounce about this. They're giving it. It was so long ago. It's in the past. We don't have to. This is Biden did this once. That's in the past, man. But this has become really powerful as a critique. I think, like with Gay, it was sort of emblematic of the fraudulence of the whole intellectual edifice upon which modern leftism is built. Do you guys think it will have the same currency in a political campaign, or is it too academic to really work for politics?
No, I think it's going to blow over. I think when people expect an October surprise, they think a lot more than this. I think people like us are obviously going to care about that. It shows who Kamala is at the end of the day. It shows kind of the airheadedness of her thought, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to move the needle one way or the other. Like you said, the mainstream media are absolutely carrying water for her. New York Times, their conservatives Rufo pounces things that, well, it's only 500 words so far that were plagiarized out of 65,000, as if that somehow saves her. The Washington Post said, well, in 2009, we just didn't have these electronic, citations and checks and all that like we do now. Again, I mean, just they're an arm essentially again for her campaign. So, I mean, that's all typical conservative stuff. And we've known that for years and years and years. But I just, unless Rufo, we'll see. I mean, who knows what he kind of has, up his sleeve. There might be a lot more. I don't think where it is right now really affect, things one way or the other. And fortunately, too, we have Elon Musk at X. So we actually know, the story is actually coming out. It's not being suppressed. So the algorithm is actually sharing this too. So I think that's one thing definitely to think about too as well. I'm glad we actually know about this. In 2020, we might not have. And in 2016, there's actually probably a very good chance we wouldn't have even known about this.
I kind of have a contrary opinion on this. Like, I don't think it matters like politically. I also don't really think it matters like anyway.
You mean it's fine for Kamala to have done this?
She didn't write the book, and she probably didn't read the book. I mean, it's like ghost written. Nobody expects everybody knows that politicians don't write their books, and I mean, it's like it's embarrassing, obviously, but I don't think it really like Claudine Gay. Like if you're a Harvard professor or somebody, or the president of Harvard, then it's like a serious matter because your whole stock in trade is that you're a scholar, you produce scholarly work, you respect like the norms of academic rigor. That being said, I think when Joe Biden would talk about, when he would quote Neil Kinnock and pretend like talking about how his grandfather worked in the coal mines and he's the first person in his family to go to college, which wasn't true. That seemed pretty bad, but because that's a direct like falsification of his own personal background. This, I mean, look, does it enhance her credibility? Well, obviously not, but I can't imagine like that this would really affect anything.
Now, okay, counterpoint. So with Obama, one of the major points on the part of his biggest supporters has always been like, not only does he play hoops with the guys, not only is he such a slick Paul, but he is also an austere religious scholar. Like he really does sit in the Oval Office with white papers, and he's a Columbia professor, and he's yada yada. I don't think anybody thought that of Kamala Harris, but this is like it's different to sort of pass over her intellectual acumen in delicate silence than it is to really like call attention to the fact that she has not only is she one of these politicians of whom there are, as you point out, it's true, like there's plenty. She's in this respect, she's just a normal Paul. She doesn't write her own books and blah blah blah. But like even her ghostwriter is a serial plagiarist. Like I think it does undercut like what was previously a real Democrat advantage, which was this whole thing of like we have the nerds on our side, like we really are the wonks,
right?
That is really no longer.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certain. Like I said, it does not do a lot for her credibility.
Yeah,
but I just can't imagine anybody. I would suspect there's maybe 3 people in America who are on the fence and for whom this would be like, okay, I can't vote for her.
Right. And who were previously thinking like, oh, that Kamala, she's really smart. That's why I want to vote for her. Like, that's not what people are going around.
No, I don't think so. I mean, when did that book come out? The book came out in
2009.
Yeah. I had just graduated from high school. It's an old book.
So that's before she was even. Was she even the district attorney at that point?
I think she was. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about crime. It's a crime book, and
Yeah. Okay.
I do like this thing. Like it's we didn't have a sophisticated electronic means of checking for citations. It's like, oh yes, I recall that Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is just rife, laced with plagiarism, with like giant passages from other people's work, or like William Buckley's oeuvre is full because he didn't have the advantage of like feeding it into ChatGPT or whatever. This is a very funny like presentist idea about how books have evolved. Uh, I wonder when do you think we'll see the first AI written presidential, if we haven't already, first AI written presidential biography?
Yeah, I would say there's a good chance it might have happened already. But it's going to come soon. I mean, there's AI generated music. You go to Spotify, and how many of these bands you never even heard of before that you just kind of have on the background, are they even real? Who knows? So this is a real problem.
Yeah. I find this sort of dispiriting, not because I think it means that the machines are going to turn us all into paper clips or whatever it's supposed to mean, but because it's just the least interesting thing that I can think of for an AI to do. Like there are a lot of uses actually of AI that are either currently possible or coming just down the pike. I could totally imagine, for instance, having an AI personal assistant that like manages my home, and turns on the temperature just how I like it and schedules my flights for me or whatever. But like, even if the AI music were better than it is, which it currently is quite banal, it would interest me not at all. Like it's disheartening. It's just dispiriting to me that this is like what we find intriguing about this technology is that it can pretend to be a person.
What would be interesting about it?
What would be interesting about it, like
AI, like what can you imagine would be good for AI to produce?
okay, well, so AI, for instance, can model. I think I'm getting this right. Can model like lipid structures and DNA curvature better than anyone has ever previously been able. Like there are problems in genetics that people have been working to solve for literally decades. Like how
Yeah.
can we tell the difference between I'm making up the details, but like basically between like a healthy helix and one with this genetic abnormality. And AI has basically figured this out to within a much larger degree of accuracy. My subject of academic interest, my PhD thesis was about the Herculaneum scrolls, which are these ashen papyri that were buried under Vesuvius. And since the 1700s, people have been trying to unroll them and read them. Like the people were like hanging them from hooks and trying to let gravity gradually, And now when I was in grad school, they had these X-rays that would kind of pick out one epsilon and like, oh, we think this is a new, some guy offered a prize for the best use of large language modeling to unroll these scrolls. And now that it's like, masses of new material from the ancient world are being unveiled, including like, so the library that these scrolls come from was a very well stocked kind of genteel library of one of the Roman upper crust. Like there could be like lost dialogues of Aristotle in there. There could be Ennius. There could be more Sappho. Like there's just like a ton of stuff. So like this is a technology that with a lot of cool use cases.
Sure.
But I don't know, like writing music isn't one of them, even if it was good music, because it's like, who cares? No a person didn't make it. So like, why do I care?
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I was thinking in terms of like like are there any sure pattern recognition, massive calculations or whatever, but yeah, I don't know. Like in a creative sense, is there anything that I would want to see AI do? No, not really, I guess.
There's one use case for creativity that might be emblematic of other possible use cases, which is like, okay, so CGI. When I was a kid, now it really is really a story hour, but this is kind of interesting. Like when I was a kid, we had a friend in LA that worked on the Lord of the Rings movies and a number of other like X-Men, and he was a special effects guy. And he took us into his office studio and he showed us the work he was doing to make Andy Serkis into Gollum. So Serkis wore this like motion capture suit and scurried around and did the voice and everything. But then guys like our buddy took a computer, fed the footage in, and said, translate that into Gollum, which is how you. And this was one of the major special effects innovations in the Lord of the Rings series. I think it was like the first time they had really done it in quite this way to this extent. And after that, you got Serkis as King Kong, and you got a bunch of other stuff. But he showed us that you have to leave the computer overnight to figure this out. And you say, go figure out how this scene can turn into Gollum. And then he showed us like, here's one that went wrong. And so like something like 48 hours of work had resulted in Andy Serkis as Gollum, but with his eyes floating outside of his head. They were just like glitched into sort of space, and everything else worked, but he had to do the whole thing over again. If you go on like Sora's website now and you look at what AI can do to like generate images out of nothing, it's basically, it doesn't actually look like Lawrence of Arabia. It doesn't look like the great filmmakers. It doesn't look real, but it looks like very good CGI. And it happens like that. Like you just tell the computer to do it. So like getting rid of previously tedious, already computerized busy work is like something that you could do on the way to making something that a human was creating, I guess, is how you could think about that.
Fair enough.
Okay, we've gotten a little bit off topic, but in sort of an interesting way. I have a question, a sort of last question for you guys, which is like, do either of you have a take on the state of the race other than it's just still a coin toss? Like we've talked about a lot of indicators and a lot of changes that have gone on. I'm curious whether you have a prediction or a sense of things that is more than different from 50-50, or if you're still at 50-50.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably getting a little bit more confident day by day. I think Trump's going to win. I think it's going to be close, probably closer than what some people would imagine. But it's just, I see this in polling. I see this in compared to where Biden was in 2020, Hillary in 2016. Harris is just way too close. She doesn't have the numbers that I think she needs at this point to win. You just see, like we were talking about, Black men. You see this especially with Gen Z. You see this in a bunch of other demographics. The momentum, Hispanics definitely. I mean, the momentum is just shifting to Trump over and over and over again. Mark Halperin, who used to be at ABC, he was saying, the state of the Harris campaign internally, they're scared. I mean, they're getting very, very nervous. So I would say for me right now, I think Trump's going to win, but I think it's going to be close.
I think I feel more like sanguine about it than I did before. I think unless Trump wins decisively on election night, and by that I mean like he wins Pennsylvania by at least a percentage point, and he wins whatever swing states he needs to win by a couple of points. Unless he wins decisively election day, he'll lose. I think like the way they have it set up with, finding paper ballots and whatnot, the longer it goes, the worse it gets for him. I think we saw that last time. But, fortunately, it sounds as though the Republicans do have, they're chasing votes. They're urging people to vote early. And it seems as though the Democrat paper is down in that regard. I've heard about things like an upstate race, upstate New York congressional race, where the Democrat lead has like collapsed in the last few, or narrowed significantly in the last few weeks. That there's all kinds of internal polling around the country showing that things are not great for the Democrats. I'm still kind of imagining that. I mean, my worst imagining is that some member of the intelligence community will freak out, or some element of the intelligence community will freak out and essentially like shoot down Trump's plane, like in an effort to save the nation. Something like that could still happen, but I mean, as it is, it seems like he's like on course for to win over 300 electoral votes. But
Yeah, it has to be a decisive victory. I think Trump's phrase for this is too big to rig, and that is definitely um, and I really hope for a decisive victory just because of the fallout prospect as well. Like I sort of, and I genuinely am saying this based on pure intuition and no information. I sort of feel like the country is a little too tapped out to really go in for another bout of riots or constitutional level turbulence one way or another. It's not that people won't be obnoxious and aggressive and perhaps even violent in the wake of whatever result happens. It's just that the ambient normie tolerance levels for that sort of shenanigans seems to have gone down to me. So that I like famous last words, but I genuinely don't see if the Democrats win, they certainly won't feel the need to egg on a 2020 style conflagration. And if the Democrats lose, they will absolutely interpret it as a sign that the country is altogether lost. That whatever small hope they had that this settler colonial abomination would one day reform and live up to the promise of its Turtle Island forebears and the peaceful democracy that the Pequot and Iroquois had founded before the Europeans arrived, like that is all gone, and the whole country must be razed to the ground. They'll start talking like, well, this just shows that democracy was a mistake or something, and that is dangerous talk. But I also think that I just get the sense that ever since 2020 that was the high watermark of our willingness to be bullied into tolerating that sort of upheaval. We shall see, and we must hope that we get a decisive victory, so that all of these things are kind of put to rest. And I'm with just for the record, I'm with you guys. I'm like starting to feel like actually there is a little bit of genuine indication that we'll get a Trump win. But with that, we have to close out. We're out of time. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys and being with our listeners. Thanks to all of you for tuning in and listening to the Roundtable. If you want to know more about everything we do at Claremont, you can visit our website at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com to read our sister publication, the Claremont Review of Books, and AmericanMind.org, which is the site that generates this podcast and also daily, sharp, incisive political commentary from the Claremont perspective. And from our friends and allies. We have a DC Center for the American Way of Life, which you can check out at dc.claremont.org. And finally, you can donate to support our work, which we very much appreciate, which we rely on to keep doing what we do at claremont.org/donate. If you like the podcast and you want to support this particular show, the easiest way to do that is just to share it around, review it, give it 5 stars, tweet it out, text your friends about it. That's how the audience grows and how we rise in the algorithmic ranks. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, Jake and Ryan Gannon, the brothers G. And thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.